You're listening to No Podcast for Old Men.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of No Podcast for Old Men, the podcast that provides you with some philosophical analysis of the Coen brothers films, all of them in chronological order. This is our third episode, and we are focused on the Coen brothers' third film, and that is the 1990 film Miller's Crossing. I should let you know, I'm one of your co-hosts. My name is Robert Jones. I'm one of the three philosophy guys here. And I'm joined by my two other co-hosts. Let's see, they're in Chico, California, Troy Jollimore. Troy, how you doing today?
Doing fine, Robert. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well. And Peter S. Fossil. Peter, where are you exactly in Kentucky right now?
I'm in Louisville.
Louisville, home of the Lebowski Fest. Is that true?
That's correct. The Orfest.
Nice. Let's jump right into this thing. Let's start out with a little summary. Our summary expert, Troy Jollimore.
I ran it through the summarizer, and so I'm going to give you the results. Guaranteed 99.5% accurate. So,
Troy, did you run this through the Chat GPT? Is this
the Chat
AI?
GPT told me all about Miller's Crossing.
Nice.
All of my thoughts today actually come from Chat GPT, so it had a lot to say about this film.
Which is interesting because a lot of the thoughts that Chat GPT has come from you. So it's a kind of a interesting circle.
It's a conundrum, isn't it? It's an ethical conundrum, Robert. So yeah, there's a lot of plot in this film, and so obviously I'm going to have to be selective. I'm not going to try to cover everything. We take all our time just doing that. And please, people, I think we always say this. I hope we always remember to watch the film first. And if you haven't seen it in a while, watch it again to refresh your memory because it's complicated. Also, just because it's such an enjoyable experience. This is an amazing film. It's set during Prohibition in an unnamed American city. The background is a conflict between two rival gangs. So it's kind of a gangster film, but with a lot of film noir elements. So there's some Italian gangsters, and they're led by Johnny Casper and his henchman, Eddie Dane, or the Dane, as they often call him. And there's an Irish contingent led by Leo and his advisor, Tom Regan. So Tom is basically the film's central character. There's a dishonest bookie, Bernie Birnbaum, who has been taking advantage of Johnny Casper, and Casper wants to have Bernie killed. Leo, against Tom's advice, tells Casper not to do it. Casper says he wasn't asking permission, he's going to do it. All this sets up the basic conflict, right? We soon find out that first, Leo is romantically involved with Bernie's sister, Verna, and that's why he's protecting Bernie. And second, we find out that Tom is also involved with Verna, though Leo doesn't know about that. So we got a love triangle going on here. Now, around this time, one of Leo's men, Rug Daniels, is found dead in the street. Leo assumes that it was Casper and retaliates, and a gang war erupts. Strife also erupts between Tom and Leo, as Leo continues to refuse to take Tom's advice. And at one point, in an attempt to undermine Verna, Tom tells Leo about his affair with her. So Leo attacks Tom and beats him brutally in public. Tom leaves. Their relationship seems to be finished. Tom goes over to Casper and starts working for him. And to get in with him, he tells him where Bernie is, gains his trust that way. Casper has Tom take Bernie out to Miller's Crossing to execute him. Famous scene. I'm sure we all remember this. Bernie out there pleads for his life, and Tom just can't bring himself to do it. He tells Bernie to get the hell out of there and never let himself be seen again. But in fact, Bernie shows up soon afterwards, blackmailing Tom. Okay, there's a lot more plot developments after this, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have you. But in the end, Tom maneuvers Casper and Bernie into meeting each other late at night in his apartment building. Bernie kills Casper, and then Tom, much to Bernie's surprise, kills Bernie. He shoots him. It's the only shot he fires in the film. I'm sure we'll have something to say about that. A final scene at Bernie's funeral temporarily reunites Tom and Leo, and Leo asks Tom to come back and work for him, but Tom refuses. And the final shot sees Tom standing alone, an enigma in the woods with no home to return to. Okay, that's the film in a nutshell.
Well done.
I shrunk it down. I'm into the whole brevity thing. So there you go.
One little factoid. You said that's the only shot that he actually fires 3 shots in this.
Oh, I suppose that's true because he fires 2 not at people. You're right.
Yeah.
He's 1 shot in with the intent to kill.
Into a body.
And then that's right. 2 shots into the air, more or less. Yeah, that's true. Good point.
Just to clarify.
No, it's important because, of course, as you know, and I'll be returning to this, one of my ideas about Coen Brothers films is that what people do with guns reveals their central character. And I think that's certainly true. So it matters how many bullets a person fires. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we learned that from your analysis of Blood
The old
Simple.
Blood Simple thing. Yeah. And you got to count the bullets in that one for sure.
Now, okay, following our strict schedule after our summary, what's up is the lightning round, where each of us gets about a minute to, I guess, make a little brief opening statement about what you think the film is about. Peter S. Fossil, why don't we go to you first?
Okay, here we go. It's a film about head and heart, about love among men, friendship-wise, erotically, and otherwise. But more generally, it's about skepticism regarding other minds, about failing to reveal oneself, even to oneself, sometimes despite the wish to do otherwise. It's about wanting others to reveal themselves and not reveal themselves. It's about doing anything rather than reveal oneself. And it's about the violence we wreak in all of this. It's also about Jews in America struggling among other despised ethnic groups, the Irish, Italians, Chinese, and Blacks. That's it.
Fantastic.
Jeez, nice work.
Yeah.
It's great because some of your insights overlap with mine, so I don't feel so stupid. I feel like
I'm surprised.
Troy, how about you? You want to give your
Sure. My lightning round. Let's see if lightning strikes.
round?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's a film about hats. Let's just say that it's about hats. But more than that, it's a film about, and a lot of my stuff overlaps with Peter's. It's about love and loyalty, and love in particular, friendship. The word friend gets used like 50 times in the screenplay, and romantic love, obviously, as well. There's the real kind of loyalty grounded in actual affection and love. And then there's the instrumental, self-interested loyalty that we see displayed by many of these people who talk a lot about love and friendship, but don't seem to actually have it. It's a film about love and reason and possible conflicts between them, how to get them to work together, how the head and the heart, as Peter mentioned, have to play different roles when human animals come together to try to build a society to lift themselves out of a Hobbesian state of nature. And a lot of this, of course, is played out in the internal conflicts and struggles of the central character, Tom, who prides himself on being a thinker, but in fact, perhaps contrary to his own self-image, has a heart and is actually driven by passion or passions much more than he realizes. So maybe if we had to reduce it down to one single question, the guide, and I think there's many more we could ask, but for me, the question I keep coming back to is, who is Tom, really?
Nice. More themes. All right, here's my little lightning round. So I think the opening scene lays out what the film is about. I'm talking about friendship. I'm talking about character. Hell, I ain't embarrassed to use the word. I'm talking about ethics, okay? So I think the film's about friendship, character, and ethics. It's also a film about gangster films. Whereas Goodfellas is a film about gangsters, which I believe Goodfellas came out the same year. Miller's Crossing is a film about gangster films. It's about the ubiquity of corruption, because the world we see in Miller's Crossing, everything is corrupt. I mean, I was trying to think of some characters who aren't corrupt, but just about everyone is corrupt to some degree. I agree it's a film about love triangle. It's a film about two love triangles, the Leo Verna Tom triangle and the Dane Mink Bernie triangle. So it is a commentary about homosexuality, or hopefully people are okay when I use the term homosexual. I'm not using it in a derogatory connotation, but I agree it's also a film about heart versus, reason versus emotion. And lastly, I agree it's a film about self-knowledge. And I noticed last night the way that the film opens with regard to Tom's self-knowledge, the bartender says, "Wake up, Tommy." And Tom says, "I'm awake." But his eyes are closed, and he goes, "Your eyes are shut." And Tom says, "Who are you going to believe?" Right there's a lot going on with Tom's journey to self-knowledge and knowledge about truth and friendship and things. Anyway, that's my little spiel.
That's awesome. Love it.
I really appreciate going to the meta level right away, because this is a film about other films, and especially noir detective films. And in that period, let's say, too, I mean, the clothing, the hats, the the costuming in general, the furniture. There's just so much. It's a love letter to that period in those movies, I think.
The Coens have said, and a lot of our listeners probably will know this already in interviews, they said the film started with an image. It started with them thinking about these guys in the hats and the coats out in the woods, where it felt like it was incongruous. They didn't belong out there. And that's where the film began. And a lot of their films begin with something more like that, an image and a feel for a certain time and a certain genre and so on that they want to get into and then sort of, muck around with.
Why don't we jump into our first theme that we'd like to talk about, which is what we call the political, social, cultural themes. Peter, do you want to start with that?
I guess I'd like to start with my last remark about Jews in America, and because you see, principally, there's three ethnic groups that they're foregrounded, and that's the Irish, Italians, and Jews, and they're all part of criminal underworlds to some extent. But of course, the Italians and the Irish are flourishing more. They're being folded into white America in lots of ways. Jews are there too, but this will get us quickly into like the character issues you touched on, because there are people who will sleep with a Jewish woman, but they won't engage in an open relationship with her.
Wait, by open relationship, you mean open to the public?
Right. A public relationship, right?
They keep it secret. It's a secret. It's not revealed. It's one of the not revealed things until Tom reveals it. But it's secret, and that's at a point where he reveals it and destroys it at the same time. Bernie is corrupt bookie, and he's talking about working the angles all the time. He seems to actually, if I didn't know the Coen brothers made this movie, I might say there's like a touch of even anti-Semitism in that. But ultimately, they are killed and marginalized and use others, and it's a difficult struggle for them among these other groups who are flourishing more than they are at that time. I mean, later on, Jewish Americans will flourish quite a bit, but it's a struggle and leads to negative results for them. Chinese and blacks are in the background. You do see little Chinese characters over a street. At one point, you hear Chinese people in the background when Tom is at the restaurant just after they find Rug Daniels. And of course, Chinatown and things Asians, signify things salacious in noir films. And you see a black man shining shoes in one of the street scenes. They're marginalized. They're really marginalized in the film, the Chinese and black populations. The Irish and Italians and Jews are more foregrounded, but of the three, the Jews, I think, are having the hardest time struggling, and they're least incorporated into that world.
That is really interesting to me, Peter, for a number of reasons, including that as I've rewatched the film a couple times over the last few weeks, I've really gravitated toward the relationship between Tom and Bernie, and how Bernie is like Tom's doppelganger in certain ways. They're very similar, which I hadn't recalled from seeing the film before, but they're very similar. I mean, obviously they're similar enough, at least, that Tom can feel enough sympathy for him to be unable to kill him the first time, though we might think, well, any human being in that role might have had the same effect on Tom. But I really found myself noticing the various ways in which both of them are largely outsiders. Both of them are sort of intellectuals in a way. I mean, Bernie as a Jew, that's part of his sort of cultural perceived identity as an intellectual class. Tom not only self-identifies as a kind of a thinker, but other people around him obviously see him that way too and refer to him as being smart, or Leo, you do the thinking,
always has
so I
reasons
don't have
for
to.
things.
He has always got reasons for things, right? He uses the word reason in various ways and so on. This is an important part of his self-conception.
Bernie works the angles. They're giving him angles. He
Yeah, they both work the angle. They're both people who are never fully sort of immersed in the game because they see it's a game, and so they rise above it. And they take advantage of it in a way. They manipulate it. They can't take it seriously, right? Like Tom is always sort of making jokes about things. He never totally takes it seriously.
He's got a lip on him.
He's got a lip on him, and it drives people crazy, right? People like Casper and the Dane and so on, that drives them nuts. Even Leo sometimes, I think it gets to him. And Verna, certainly. They're both people. Well, we can come back to this. There's more to say about it, but your comments are making me think about how Tom, as a member of this group, the Irish, who are becoming assimilated but not fully there yet, and sort of would remember what it's like to be outsiders, would have this sort of resistance about being associated with somebody like Bernie, who is a member of a group that is clearly still in some ways on the outside. So I think we feel that inner conflict in a way. There's so many ways I think in which Tom fears that he's like Bernie and doesn't want to be like Bernie. And I think that this is one of them. Can we talk a little? I mean, this could fall under philosophical stuff too, but I think social cultural, it's fair to bring up the issue of Casper's view of ethics and of society, because it's pretty interesting. Look, it's hilarious. First of all, we do our lightning round where each of us, says what the movie's about, and of course, as Robert basically said, this film tells us what it's about from the very beginning. The initial character, the initial speech, the first thing we hear, almost before we even see anything or have seen anybody, we hear a character laying out the themes of the film. Right? Well, we might disagree, are they necessarily? But in fact, they are very important themes. Certainly, friendship and also character and ethics. These are central to this film. So the film itself tells us in a lot of ways what it's about. And what did you make of Casper's view? I mean, it's very interesting. To me, it seems like he is a kind of a Hobbesian, that he thinks that without, what does he say about animals? That, without this kind of ethical system that we've constructed, this is what raises us above the animals, right? The beasts of prey, the beasts of burden, as he says, we've built a society in which we sort of live and act for mutual benefit, et cetera. And as long as we all follow the rules, we all do well. It pays off for everybody. It's great. But of course, the problem then with somebody like Bernie Birnbaum is he's not following the rules. So he exists as this, subversive, disruptive force.
Well, and to play off the Bernie thing there is, I've read some of that talk about ethics as part of the self-deception, because immediately he shows himself that he's not, and you're right. He talks about the animals there, but Bernie in the forest, as he's walking, he thinks towards his death, he says, like, I've never killed a friend, Tom, and you're my friend, and that's what separates us from those animals.
Yeah.
And so he's declaring a moral principle there, all the while,
There are differences in this film about who the animals are. That's one of these things that comes up, and the animals are not civilized and the humans are civilized, but people can't agree on who the animals are and who actually is civilized. And I think you're absolutely right. And of course, the Coens want to have this reaction. There's something funny about Johnny Casper. I mean, there's a lot of things funny, partly that he's played by John Polito, who's wonderful and hilarious.
So wonderful.
But part of the humor is that he's so intent on ethics, and he means it. He thinks he's ethical. He's ethically outraged at Bernie's behavior, but he's so unethical in certain very obvious ways.
I mean, it seems like the obvious thing is that the institutions who govern the world really are being governed themselves by background figures who are corrupt. But those corrupt figures themselves have discourses about how we're the just ones, we're the good ones, we're the civilized ones. I mean, we see it. I don't want to get into the particulars of the politics of the world now, but it's just nauseating to hear people declare themselves, the representatives of goodness and justice in the world. We all can see that they're not, and we suspect that there are stronger forces behind that who also, are corrupt and probably think of themselves as very much otherwise. And so that's how I saw that.
So what's interesting, and you just raised this, I think, Peter, yourself, and that is, in this film, it's a really interesting world. The Coens create this insulated world of the gangland. And anytime we see anything outside the gang world, it's sort of like extras walking in the back of the street, or, for the most part. It's interesting that the mobster and the politician are basically one and the same person. In other films, when you find out that the mayor and the police chief are on the take, it's like this is like, you're supposed to assume that everyone is in some sense corrupt. There's no part of civil society that isn't part of the mob. So I think that struck me as an interesting kind of political and cultural theme. And then the other one I just wanted to mention was, one of the things that some writers have talked about is that all three homosexual characters die violently. Sartre said, if there weren't Jews, the Nazis would have to invent them. Part of the existential identity of Nazism is the Jew, right? And I think some writers have said things like the identity of acceptable male social relation norms, those in many ways are defined by the ones that aren't socially acceptable. And I think in this film, you get the idea of the homosexual versus the heterosexual man. And so I think that theme of the delineation of like what it means to be a man is to not be the other. And in this case, we see it with Casper talking about how Bernie is, what does he say? He's a horse of a different color, right? So it's this animal illusion. He's othered. I read some people trashing the Coens saying this is a homophobic film. I see the criticism. I think it's important to acknowledge that there is some tension with the role or the way that the Coens portray homosexuality.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, this is such a hard film to read in terms of, how are we supposed to feel about anything? I don't think we even understand the central character, and that's even part of the point. So I can certainly understand the people, and I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. All three homosexual characters do die.
Oh, wait, and Troy,
killed.
can you, for people who watch the film and may not have caught it, tell us a quick background on who are the homosexual characters, how they're related?
So there's Eddie Dane, or the Dane who I mentioned in the plot summary. He is Casper's primary henchman. He is having sex with Mink, who we meet only once, but we hear his voice another time on the phone as well. He's played by
I think we
Steve
could say they're in a
Buscemi.
relationship.
They're in a relationship. That's true. What do they say about he's the Dane's boy?
He's the
Yes,
Dane's boy.
he's Eddie Dane's boy. Yes. And Casper at that point seems very tolerant about it, right? There's no suggestion that he looks down on that relationship or anything like that. He just said, no, he's Eddie Dane's boy. Therefore, we
I
can
think the Dane
trust
does
him,
care about
he
him.
says. Oh, absolutely. I think that's absolutely clear. But Mink is also involved with Bernie, who we have mentioned, Bernie, the central character in, the doppelganger again of Tom. And I think, in fact, this is another aspect of that doppelganger relationship that maybe we can talk about later on. But yeah, Verna also at one point, Robert, says something about her brother Bernie and how he's regarded by people. People see him as strange and different
And corrupt.
and correct, and that's not fair to him. She says she's defending him. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, remember, he says that she wanted to teach me some of the art,
Yes.
bed artistry, the arts of the bedroom, and whatever it was, and it was to sort of save him from his friend.
Right. Right. So Verna, apparently, we gather at least, has issues with his being a homosexual, whereas a lot of the other characters, it isn't clear that they do.
She's a sick twist. I got to
She's
tell
a sick
you.
twist. That's right.
A sick twist. Bernie calls Mink his friend too. He says he can never have too many, but then he kills him later, right? Whereas the Dane wants to protect Mink, Bernie turns on him and kills him, which I thought was also like, the Jewish guy kills his lover, and also it's clear like he doesn't have the duty to family that others do, that Verna does certainly. But anyway, he comes off pretty badly, I think, in that.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's a homoerotic quality to Tom and Leo's relationship though too. One of the things I find really great, I mean, there's so many just delicious things about this film, but I think it's the way Leo, Leo has the big heart. He's like, he has the biggest heart of all of them, and he's a little bit.
He's all heart. Leo's all heart.
He's all heart. He doesn't like to think.
He even says it. I don't like to think. Right?
Yeah, he's all heart, and it's said many times about him, or several times about him in the film. But he also, the way he talks to Tom, is like, Tommy, come on, Tommy, what do you, come on, go along with me on this. What do you, oh, you're just needling me, whatever. And then he forgives him for sleeping with his girlfriend, right? He says, oh, you're both young and everything. He loves Tom, and Tom loves him. And I think it's a real struggle for Tom. When he throws over Vera there, I thought of it a little bit of a, it's a resentment kind of thing, but we'll get back to that. Anyway, I just wanted to say that I think there's a homoerotic relationship with Tom and Leo.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
In fact, there are people who have written on this film specifically saying that there's a homosexual, sublimated homosexual relationship there.
Tom Regan / Reagan, right? I mean, that's another.
I know,
Yep.
yeah,
Nice.
Yeah. Well, fellas, what do you say we move into our? This is what they pay us to do, right? This is the philosophical themes of the Coen brothers. So who wants to jump in on what you think the major philosophical themes? There's so many of them, as you laid out already, but who wants to jump in there?
You should start, Robert. Robert C. Jones.
Go, Robert.
I need both of your help here. I'm going to make reference to David Hume, Aristotle, Thomas Hobbes, and Plato. But when it comes to Hume, please, Peter S. Fossil, you're one of the world's Hume experts. So you need to correct me.
All right.
And I read a wonderful, I want to put this out there, first of all. I read a wonderful essay. I looked this guy up. His name is Bradley Hurling, And he wrote an essay. I think he teaches like religious studies and philosophy. He wrote a great essay on the ethics and the kind of philosophical issues behind the plot and the relations. And so a lot of what I want to give credit where credit is due. I'm sort of combining my thoughts with this essay. It was really fantastic. I recommend, the essay is called Ethics, Heart, and the Violence in Miller's Crossing by Hurling. A couple of things I wanted to say about the philosophical things. So I want to go back to Casper, to the opening of the film. Will you allow me, can I read a little bit of the monologue of Casper when it starts?
Yeah, but you have to do it in his voice.
Okay. Well, that's okay. We're both from Philly.
Mhm.
John Polito and I are from Philly. And I noticed a couple words. I was like, that's Philadelphia. Anyway, he says, I'm talking about friendship. I'm talking about character. I'm talking about, hell, Leo, I ain't embarrassed to use the word. I'm talking about ethics. So here's his argument. He goes, when I fix a fight, say if I pay a 3-1 favorite to throw a goddamn fight, I figure I got a right to expect that fight to go off at 3-1. But every time I lay a bet with this son of a bitch, Bernie Birnbaum, before I know it, the odds are even up, or worse, I'm getting the short money. Then he says, I'm going to use a racial epithet here. Sheeny knows I like sure things. He's selling the information. I fix the fight. Out of time, money comes in. The odds go straight to hell. The point is, Bernie ain't satisfied with the honest dollar he can make off the VIG, the fix. He ain't satisfied with the business I do on his book. He's selling tips on how I bet. And that means part of the payoff that should be riding on my hip is riding on someone else's. So back we go to these questions: friendship, character, ethics. And then he asks Leo. Leo says, yeah, it's not clear. Then he says one last thing, and I'll stop quoting and I'll get to my little analysis. It's a wrong situation, which that's another one of those lines that appears elsewhere in the film. It's a wrong situation. It's getting so a businessman can't expect no return from a fixed fight. Now, if you can't trust a fix, what can you trust? For a good return, you got to go betting on chance. And then you're back with anarchy, right back in the jungle on account of the breakdown of ethics. That's why ethics is important. It's the grease that makes us get along, what separates us from the animals. Ethics. Whereas Bernie Birnbaum is a horse of a different color, ethics-wise, as in he ain't got any. He's stealing from me. So here's what I want to throw out there. And, this is, again, an amalgamation of different ideas I read. So the first one we have is going to, Peter, you're especially, Hume's kind of moral psychology. So we have this theme of like passion versus reason. And we see the kind of inescapability of sentiment in moral deliberation. There's no way you can get around. You can't be Mr. Spock, right? Second, I found Aristotle. Of course, Aristotle and the Greeks famously said, ethics is important because that is what separates us from, we have the nutritive soul, we have the animal soul, we have the rational soul. That's what separates us. Ethics, we're moral beings. And so we have an Aristotelian theme there. And going back to something you said, Troy, we have the Hobbesian theme in this beginning monologue. We talked about Hobbes when it comes to raising Arizona. We have, the state of nature where everyone is free. Everyone is, there's war against everyone, as we, nasty, brutish, and short. And to keep things from spiraling into chaos, we have this kind of primordial social contract. Everyone is protected. And if you break the contract, then you are subject to punishment. So what's interesting is this kind of part of the philosophy of Casper is, on the one hand, it's kind of ridiculous to think that he's thinking about ethics when he's talking about, when I fix a fight, I have a right to benefit from it. But once you enter the logic of Casper, or as his name is Giovanni Gasparo, once you enter that world, then his logic actually holds up, right? If everyone starts violating the covenant or the sort of rules of the mob, then you do end up in this kind of anarchy, right? That's the first thing I want to say. Quickly, I'll go through the other things. when you go to Plato's Republic and you know that famous in the first book one, where he has this dialogue with Polemarchus, and then he has the famous thing with Thrasymachus about justice. I think you can see some of that in here, right? So Polemarchus says that justice is doing good to friends and harm to enemies. That's what he says, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the very view that we see in this film, right? Casper says at one point, he goes, he likes everything above board. So everybody knows who's a friend and who's an enemy. That's the one thing he says.
And Leo says that explicitly at one point,
And
right?
Leo says it.
You do anything for your friends and you kick your enemies as hard as you can.
Yeah. He says that to Tom. Then we get this notion of justice. Famously, Thrasymachus says in the Republic, he says, justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger, right? Who's in power, right? Casper and Leo, they're not just above the law, they are the law. They literally have the law in their office, right? So you have that kind
We're all
of
friends here.
We're all friends.
Yeah.
And then you have the Aristotelian notion of virtue, because what Casper says about Bernie is, because Leo calls him on it and says, look, how do you know it's not other people? And this is where Casper says, character. See, everyone knows how this game works, but Bernie, he's an enemy. He's not a friend because he doesn't have the right kind of character. So that's my kind of laying it out there, the sort of basic philosophical themes. There's other stuff I want to say. I particularly want to come back to Bernie's plea at Miller's Crossing, because I think Bernie's plea ties into all this stuff. It echoes back to the opening monologue of Casper. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there for a moment and turn.
It's an interestingly circular argument that we get from Casper, isn't it, about Bernie? We know that Bernie has a bad character because of these bad things that he's doing, but we know he's the one doing the bad things because he's got a bad character.
Yeah.
Like somewhere you got to get some independent evidence there to establish some of that stuff, but he just seems perfectly happy to rest content in the little circle of justification.
Yeah, and of course, what the code might be too, that he's gay and he's Jewish. I think for me, some of that, Robert. By the way, that was really well laid out perfectly. But is that bit about hiding yourself from yourself with these this discourse about and willing to do almost anything to not face who you are there, even though on a certain level. I mean, he knows he's a criminal, and he says, like, I'm not afraid to say it. It's nothing. It's not above the, fixing a fight is anything but above the board. It's anything but transparent, and he's Thrasymachus pretending to be, whatever, Aquinas or something. And it's all self-interest, and it's all about his gain. He's manipulating others. You might say it's the morality to be cultural political on it is of the bosses. Bosses, exploit their workers. They pull in as much money as they possibly can for themselves. They think they're entitled to it, that it's their right to do this. Behind the scenes, they've got people in their pocket, but they present themselves as like, the job creators and the wise ones. And these are the people, you should listen to them about, you think where Musk presents himself. He's going to pronounce on politics. He's going to pronounce on this and that. Why? Because he has money. I mean, and he deserves that money. So he's, I think illustrating a refusal to face himself, but also hiding himself through these linguistic and moral devices, and doing so, presenting the ethics of the bosses.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Casper talks about it when he gives the justification as if, well, this arrangement's good for everyone. It benefits everybody. But obviously, this leaves out the fact that it especially benefits him because he's the one really reaping the benefits of these fixed fights. And there's got to be somebody it's not good for because that money's coming from somewhere. There are people who are losing these bets, obviously.
The people who bet on the other.
Right. So it's just not true to say, oh, we'll have anarchy without this. This arrangement's good for everyone. Obviously, that can't be true. And it is, I think, something we see very common in these sort of justifications of such social arrangements that, well, look, it's great for everyone, whereby everyone we mean, some certain subclass of people like me, and it's good for you, Leo, which in a lot of ways it is, right? Now, interestingly, in fact, Tom takes Casper's side on this. Tom's not critical of it. He doesn't seem to have a problem. Tom thinks, at least in this particular case, Leo, look, you should go along with this. You should let this happen. So Tom seems, and it's one of
But it's
the
not a moral
complications.
argument.
It's not, no, not at all. That's right. Yeah. I mean, no, for Tom, yeah, right. He doesn't seem to care morally one way or the other. He just knows, look, Leo's on top right now. The arrangement is good for us. So both Casper and Tom, interestingly enough, at the beginning, find themselves on kind of the same side because they both want to preserve the status quo.
Yeah.
And in Tom's mind, to come back to the Humean theme of, reason and passion, in Tom's mind, that's the reasonable position. Whereas Leo with the heart is going to screw it all up, right? Leo's the one bringing love into it, and love is disruptive. So love's going to, stands to disrupt the whole arrangement, and who knows what's going to happen. So yeah, at the beginning, absolutely, we don't get any sense that Tom has a moral conscience or is doing any kind of moral evaluation. And he thinks of himself as the reasonable person looking at it saying, hey, this is working, it's good, Casper's got a point, let him do what he wants to do.
But he presents it as reasons, like you said before, but he has more of a heart than he wants to lay out.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah.
This is all about strength. Casper's too strong for you now. You can't trade body blows with him. And, think about how much you lose by protecting Bernie versus how much, you would gain by giving him over, et cetera. It sounds like about just naked calculation. It's nothing about friendship has nothing to do with it. But on another level, we start to learn that, especially as the film goes on, that he loves Leo. He's afraid for Leo. He thinks he's trying to protect his friend or his his beloved friend.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think this is, and it sounds like, I suspect you agree that this film is the story of Tom coming to a kind of self-knowledge by realizing that, he thought of himself as a purely rational, reasonable person. And what was driving him all along was love for Leo, maybe love for Verna too. And maybe the two didn't go together. And that's why he ends up in a tragic position. But he wasn't the purely rational person he thought he was. So Hume maybe was right. Ultimately reason does very little. It's sentiment at the bottom. It's love, right, driving all this stuff.
And I think this goes back to what you said. I think it was Troy, but maybe you both said it. Part of the theme of the film is this kind of self-discovery of Tom's kind of inward search for who he is. And I think, yeah, as you mentioned, he's pretty much calculated. He's all head. He doesn't make moral decisions. He makes intellectual, calculating, very, very like kind of logical decisions. And at the end, when we look into Tom's face, when the camera pans into his face, there really has been a transformation. There really is a kind of metamorphosis. It's like Tom finally becomes a full human. You get the sense that his heart's broken and he's a moral being at that point, as opposed to a utilitarian calculation machine.
I think too, tell me what you think about this. You were saying, before, the way you framed it, Troy, in your summary, was that Tom was sort of subverting Verna. And that's true. But it's because he couldn't stand to have let Leo marry her. When Leo reveals that in that scene, that's when he throws her over and he decides he'd rather destroy her relationship with Leo and maybe have a chance to have her then. But that's what he can't stand. And at the end too, she's going off with Leo, or is she? Because she goes off by herself. But I think he's realized he's never going to have her, and so he doesn't want to be in that. He'd rather be alone, go off somewhere else, than be in a world where he watches her, with Leo.
One of the questions of the film, it's a little bit overdetermined. Why does Tom tell Leo about his affair with Verna? And on the face of it, as you said, it looks like when Leo says, I'm going to ask her to marry me, that's when Tom kind of loses and he divulges everything. But it's not, you can make an argument that he loves Leo and he's protecting Leo.
He's protecting Leo. I totally agree.
Or you can make the obvious argument to make is he's in love with Verna. At least that's what Verna believes, right? She even tells him that's why you did what you did. But when Verna says you wanted me, he's silent. He doesn't say.
No, yeah. No, in fact, he asks a question, right? That's a wonderful scene. I think it's so revealing. I forget the context exactly, but she says something about what was it you wanted or something. And rather than saying what I wanted, he genuinely seems perplexed and uncertain. And he asks a question. He says, what did I want? Right? He reflects on himself. What did I want? And then Verna says, me. Like she answers it. She tells him, this was your motivation. You were trying to get me. He isn't clear that was his motivation. I don't think he knows what his motivation was.
in the context of their fight where he's raising hell, though, he does declare his love for her, right? But it comes off as almost like it's deeply sarcastic because he had just
Yes.
accused her of being willing to sell her grandmother, and then he throws that out, and you're like, is that real? Is it genuine? Is it sarcastic? Is it ironic? What's going on there? And yeah, maybe there's just a problem of self-knowledge here. He doesn't really know what he wants and who he is. And you're right, Robert. At the end, maybe that becomes clarified.
I think that's right. As the more I watch this film, I think that Tom doesn't really know. There's no clearly true interpretation of his actions. He himself really doesn't know. Remember, too, at the end, he asks Leo, well, do you always know why you do things? And Leo says, yeah, of course. And I don't know how to read that either. Like either Leo really does because he's that simple. He's not complicated like Tom is. There's no
Right.
lack of self-knowledge because there's not as much self there to fail to know. Or Leo has a lack of self-knowledge even here, and he doesn't realize it. He doesn't always know. But it's clear that Tom doesn't know, right? Tom has kind of realized he thought
But
he
don't you
knew
think
why
he's
he did what
also
he did.
hiding himself from himself by continuing to insult Vero? He cannot he can't not insult her, and it seems like he's trying to keep a distance between themselves,
Definitely.
almost like
Yes.
just working so hard not to get.
Yeah.
And you're like, why don't you
Yeah.
just embrace her? I'm
Yeah.
gonna. I gotta keep you at a distance. You're a tramp, and you gotta.
You're a grifter. You had grifter parents. You're going to have
You're a
grifter kids. Yeah.
grifter.
Think of Tom's position. He's afraid of being like Leo because Leo doesn't think he's all heart. And so he does this kind of thing to make sure he doesn't become, a lovesick teenager type like Leo. But then he worries that he's becoming like Bernie because Bernie has no heart and he's all thinking. So he's trying to reject him too. He's trying to reject both of these male figures in his life and find this, I guess, Aristotelian middle ground, which is really hard to find.
God, you're so good.
Early in the film, when Leo says, like, look, you just do anything to help your friends, right? And then Tom says, wrong, Leo. You do things for a reason. He's very confident about it. Then at the end of the film, to Leo, he says, do you always know why you do things, Leo? His confidence by the end of the film is what I used to be is not what I am now.
Yeah.
Don't you think I've watched this moment over and over, not because it's really hard to figure out some elements of it, but just so exquisitely acted. And it's when Tom comes at the very beginning, comes over to when it's where you meet Verna, I think. He knocks on the door, she opens, and her physical posture is just so perfect. The way she sinks into her hip. She's exhausted with him. She's angry with him. She wants to say, like, what now? I'm ready to fight, but her dress is open, exposing her breast. And she's in night clothes, and she almost says, it's clear, like she wants him to say more. She says, I'm here for my hat. She's like, is that all? She slams the door, but then when he knocks again, she opens it right away. She's right there. And then he says, I want more, basically. And she's, why didn't you say so? I knew you wanted more, and I want you to want more. And
I want you to say that you want more. Yeah. Yep.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
the way that the way that stage and the way she executes that scene, it's goddess-like. It was perfect.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
Quick trivia note. Again, I might be reading too much into it, but Verna's apartment number is 3. So I thought, there can't be an accident. There is a love triangle going.
Huh.
So what do you got? What do you got more on the docket for, or in your notes for the philosophical themes?
We haven't come back to skepticism yet. It's sort of raised. Actually, in a way, we are talking about it because we're talking about the lack of self-knowledge, and that is one of the big forms that skepticism takes in this film. Like, if we think about this in comparison with the previous films, and in particular Blood Simple, there's this very interesting difference because in Blood Simple, and we talked about this, of course, on that episode, our first episode, the viewer, the audience is always sort of kept in a very objective position, sort of above the characters, and we always know more than they do. And so we are in a position to look at their actions and understand where they're going wrong, why this isn't going to work, the misapprehensions that they have. It's not the same kind of thing in Miller's Crossing. In one way, it kind of is, but in other ways, it isn't. First of all, there's very few cases where we, the audience, have essential information that none of the characters have, because Tom at least usually has the important information that we have. There's one, and part of the reason for this, by the way, is that Tom is in almost every scene. I can only think of 2 scenes in this film that Tom isn't in. One of them is the sequence with Leo at home when the attackers come and he fights them off and so on, and that amazing Danny Boy sequence. And then the other one is the very short scene where the kid and the dog find Rug Daniels's body in the street. And that's an interesting scene, what happens out of that, because that gives us a little bit of what we get a lot more of in Blood Simple and other cases, where we see the kid take Rug Daniels's toupee and run off with it. And none of the major characters know what happened, and they all have misinterpretations, right? So we see Leo and Tom later on, and Leo says, they took his hair, Tom. Why would they do that, right? Jesus, that's strange. And that's a great little Coen Brothers joke for us, because we know what really happened, but none of them do in this case. Not even Tom knows.
Yeah, Tom thinks it's a woman's gun, but it's a gay man's gun, right?
Yeah, right. Tom is getting things wrong too here, but he's still more cautious than Leo. He's more of a skeptic in the pragmatic sense, because Leo leaps to the conclusion that, of course, it was Casper's men who did this. And Tom tries to caution him about that. And Leo, because he doesn't have a skeptical bone in his body, basically, much like Casper, actually, in concluding that Bernie, is the guilty one and so on, that Leo's the same way. He knows what happened right away. He's not going to listen to Tom about it.
He thinks Tommy's a friend when he's not,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
What's interesting is not only is Tom in every scene, but as the intrigue unfolds, everything we discover about the plot is through Tom, right? So the Coens make sure we know what Tom knows. That's as much as we know for the most part. It's not like in other Coen films, aside from the Rug Daniels thing where the kid grabs the toupee. Other films, we're in on it and the characters aren't. In this case, we take Tom's perspective. We only know as much as Tom knows, and we see how he reasons, right? So we're kind of limited in that way along with Tom.
Yeah, it's much more like Barton Fink in a way, where he's the central character and in pretty much every scene, maybe even every one in that case. I don't remember. We'll see when we come.
It's a kind of noir trope, and I think it's true in Lebowski too, that you follow the detective and you're with the detective pretty much all through the film. And it's also, I think, a trope in some noir fiction, maybe not all of it. There's not you don't get like an omniscient narrator, and so you're going along with the detective, but you aren't in people's heads.
Yes,
so much.
Yes. Dashiell Hammett very much. And so this film, the Coens have said, very influenced by a couple of Dashiell Hammett novels, The Glass Key and Red Harvest. And that's the way he writes. There's no, unlike Philip Marlowe in those books, Raymond Chandler books, where you get when he's thinking, it's first person narration and so on. These are totally objective. You're outside their heads, and so you know what they're doing and you know what they're saying about what they do, but you don't get into their heads to know what they're actually thinking. And that's very interesting, of course, in this case, because I think one of the things that happens in this film as we watch it is we're thinking Tom knows a bunch of stuff we don't know because he's not letting us in on it. Like he knows again why he's doing what he's doing. And then at the end, we find, suddenly maybe he didn't know either. Maybe he was as much in the dark about what he was doing as we were. He was just doing it. And he thought, God has a reason, so I must have a reason, and so on. And so we think, he must have a reason. But in fact, some of the times he was just reacting emotionally in one way or another. He was just improvising or being spontaneous. He's a mystery to himself, just like he's a mystery to us. So when Tom says, and he says twice, right? What is it? Nobody knows anybody not that well. That even applies to the self, right? You don't even know yourself that well.
Definitely. And of course, again, what he says to Leo, you pick that fight so you can tuck yourself in with Casper. And again, he goes, I don't know. Do you always know, why you do this? So again, we have that. Oh, and Peter, quickly, I agree with you for the most part, but the Big Lebowski, we do find out that Bunny's alive before anyone else, right? We see her drive by. And
for the most part. But I mean,
yeah.
But he's in that scene too. He's on the side of the street.
That's right. He just didn't see her, right? We see her and he doesn't. So there's little departures from that paradigm, but that is the dominant paradigm in those
Even
films.
like in the Pancake House scene, like they have the fan in the background at the stoplight that the dude and
that's right,
and Walter are in.
So he's nominally in every scene.
Nominally, I mean, you're right, Robert.
And we do know things he doesn't know. That's true.
We do know things he doesn't know too.
True enough.
I wanted to circle back, as I mentioned. I was thinking about Bernie's plea, because I think that's an important aspect of the film. And Troy, you mentioned this, that there is a kind of doppelganger aspect between Tom and Bernie. And in fact, it's made very explicit. The second time we see Bernie, he's sitting in the chair that Tom was in Tom's apartment. Tom's sitting in the chair that Bernie was in. Bernie's sort of in control. So we have that doppelganger thing. But again, there's two questions. A, why does Tom not kill Bernie the first time? And more importantly, the puzzle that I haven't quite figured out, why does Tom kill Bernie at the end of the film?
Yeah, yeah.
Going to the Bernie's plea, I wanted to go through, and again, in reading that essay I was telling you about, it was a really interesting essay. One of the things that he mentions in this article is the kind of arguments that Bernie uses being walked to his supposed death spot. Just as an aside, circling back to your point about the role of the Jews play in the film, you can't watch that scene.
Right.
I mean, he's Jewish, he's a homosexual, he's out in the forest, right? So it's certainly conjuring images of people in Poland, who are lined up.
Ukraine,
so that
absolutely,
they're playing with that imagery, right? But thinking about that moment, the first thing is with regard to character, Bernie, he has these entreaties to Tom. He's like, look, you're not the kind of person that kills people. We're not muscle, right? So he has this identifying with Tom. You and I are the kinds of people, we're not the kinds of people that do that. So he gives a character argument, of course, going back to the kind of Aristotelian thing. And that doesn't work on Tom. He just still, every time we're seeing John Turturro, and he's breaking, as the further they get in, he's breaking down. And every time the camera turns, he's got that icy look. It's really unnerving because you're like, Tom really does have it in him. It's kind of scary. But so when that fails, Bernie goes to this second kind of argument, a retributive justice argument, where he's like, look, I'm just a grifter, right? I play the angles. The punishment doesn't fit the crime. It's not a death penalty crime. All I did is take a little bit of money, right? But of course, once you enter that world of, and quote, consent to that contract, this is the penalty, right? You steal money, you die. And that doesn't work on Tom. That the kind of retributive justice. And then he does this interesting thing, I think, where this is, to me, one of the most interesting parts of that is, Casper says, look, Bernie's behavior, if you let it go, it's going to lead to this state of nature, this Hobbesian, anarchy and chaos. But what's interesting, Bernie sort of turns the tables and says, if you follow Casper's view, that's the thing that leads to this barbarity, this like subhuman. It's Casper, if you follow it, it makes us into the animals. You and I, we're human, right? So he kind of turns that initial argument on its head and says, our system is actually the moral system and his isn't. And that doesn't work on Tom. And then coming back to the theme that both of you touched on, it seems to me, again, going back to Hume, it's the moral intuition, it's the sentiment that works. So when he finally says, look in your heart, of course, look in your heart, which we hear many times that Tom, either he doesn't have one or it's very tiny. And it's interesting because that's what works. The moral intuition, kind of Humean moral intuition, that's when Tom points the gun away and fires. Yeah. So the reason I find this interesting is that all of these sort of logical, if you will, arguments that Bernie gives, none of them work. It's only when he appeals to Tom's heart. It's only when he appeals to that kind of moral intuition. That's when it changes Tom's behavior and changes his little tiny heart gets changed. So
yeah, and I think that's brilliant. And who said he had a little tiny heart? It was Verna. To me, Verna is the most painful, tragic character to me, is because she's pleading with him to see his heart, just in the same way that her brother does. And in her case, he just won't, refuses to. He slides it over again with more abuse towards her. Bernie does get through there. Part of it's, I think, also just his physical behavior and the tone of his voice, his whining and crying, which humiliates him and his masculinity later. But that's part of the reaching of the heart. I think you're absolutely right about that. So yeah,
I think that's true. But it's also, of course, the situation that this is life and death. This person's life is at stake. And Tom, up to this point in the film, we have not seen him shoot anyone. We've rarely seen him with a gun. This isn't even his own gun, right? Don't they hand him the gun when he goes?
When they hand him the gun too, he looks at it like he's never seen one. Like, what do I do with this? I don't use guns.
So I mean, when Bernie says you're not this type of guy, he's right, right? Tom's not the
Yeah.
type of guy that shoots people, that executes them, certainly. And so, Tom's discovering this thing we probably already suspected. I think the only time we've even seen Tom be violent up to this point is when he was about to be beat up by Casper's men. He hits the one guy with the chair.
Chair, which
Other
really
than that,
surprises the other guy.
You're right. Like, right. That's clearly how out of character it is. It breaks the rules and it's out of character. And the guy looks at him, right? Jesus, Tom, you weren't supposed to do that. It's a great moment, right?
Remember when Verna has the gun under his chin, and that's a exquisite moment too, where she says, "Do you expect me to believe you?" And he says, "No."
No.
It's just the way that's delivered is so perfect. But he says to her at the end of that, "See, it's not so easy."
That's right.
So easy.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what he's discovering. And he probably already knew it on some level because he doesn't seem to use guns. Yeah. Again, he thinks his way out of situation. He doesn't resort to violence to solve things the way other people do. So I think this is very much in character for him, but it's very threatening to him again because it appeals to his heart. And his story about himself is, I don't have one. I do what makes sense. He's been arguing all along to Leo, let Bernie die. So why shouldn't Bernie die? So now he has to sort of go against himself and reverse that judgment that he's made. But when he's face to face with a human being, the confrontation of the other, right? You can't do it. It's easy to say in a comfortable room, oh yeah, let the guy die, let this guy kill that other guy. It's very, very hard if you're an ordinary human being to actually do it yourself, to pull that trigger.
Well, I was going to say, we have to say too, at this point, I think that, it's not just an accident that scene became, famous. The Look Into Your Heart scene with Bernie and Tom out there. That's Miller's Crossing. Miller's Crossing is in the woods. It's out there in the woods. It's not in the city. They're going to say, we'll take you out to Miller's Crossing. And they had to take him back to that same locus of death. Whereas in many films, like in comedies of that period, the green world is the place couples go to restore their relationship. Whereas here in the green world, things end, and the first thing you see, by the way, too, is the trees as not the first thing. When the opening credits roll, you're showing that space. That's
right. The first time you see it. Metaphorically, it's very interesting that society, the thing that they have constructed against anarchy, the city, is noisy and chaotic and it's kind of a mess, whereas the wilderness that represents death for them, that's the place, like you say, they take. And plenty of people are killed in the city. It's not like everybody goes out to the wilderness to die. But for them, it has this symbolic value that because this guy, he's not just going to die like, people getting shot in the speakeasy or whatever. This guy has violated our rules. He, again, is a disruptive force that threatens to bring anarchy. He has to be removed from society itself in order to be slaughtered. And he himself feels this, right? Because like Robert, like you were saying, he himself says to Tom, I can't die out here. I can't die like a dumb animal, right? It matters, almost as if it would be okay if he was killed in the city, but not out here.
It's the locus of animals.
Yeah, it's very fast. So Miller's Crossing is sort of represents the state of nature as opposed to the state of society that most of the film is set in, which also turns out not to be very civilized.
I found it really interesting. Just a moment in the very beginning, that scene where Casper is confronting Leo. We learn that Casper is paying protection money to Leo as the big boss. He never in that moment says that's over now. He never says, I'm not going to pay that anymore. Like, we're done. It's clear he's still, in that position.
Casper really values the rules. I was saying to Robert the other day, Casper is kind of like Walter in The Big Lebowski, right? Doesn't anybody give a shit about the rules? Like, Casper is outraged because Bernie broke the rules. And that threatens Casper's a terrified person. He's terrified of potential disruptions. And that's what Bernie represents to him. But of course, Leo does too, again, because Leo's in love. And so he also could disrupt the whole system.
Peter, going back to that scene where they're in the doorway in the rain and she has the gun to him. Another wonderful exchange is, she says, I thought you didn't care about him. And he says, I said we were through. I didn't say I didn't care
exactly.
about him.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. That is one of the key lines in the film. It's so good.
Oh, it's so important.
There's so much packed into that.
He does seem to understand that he does, care for Leo. It's more than just it's a little confession there.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think by that point he's facing up to it inside. And again, this is part of what's making him turn against Bernie, because going back to the homoerotic theme, he loves Leo, right? How much does he love Leo? That's threatening for a masculine guy like Tom. So he's starting to worry that he loves Leo inappropriately in some way. And so he has to reject that part of himself, and ultimately by killing him, if that's the explanation of why he kills Bernie, because that is a huge question. There's no question about it. I agree with you, Peter. That killing is gratuitous. He doesn't have to do it for strategic reasons.
Is it the case? Maybe I missed some other that when Leo's walking away in the forest there, that's the first time we see him wearing a hat. Or does he wear hats other times? I can't quite remember now.
I can't think of him with a hat. Yeah.
He's somebody who doesn't wear a hat.
Going back to that really iconic scene that we talked about in the woods at Miller's Crossing with that amazing performance by John Turturro. If you look at I downloaded the screenplay, and the Coens actually, in the front of the screenplay, they wrote casting suggestions. Here's who they list for Bernie: Eric Bogosian, Ned Eisenberg, Michael Mantell, John Pankow, and John Turturro. Now, I think Eric Bogosian may have been good. And another person who came to mind, I always thought that Eric Roberts would have been able to pull off that Bernie role, because I think of his role, not only in The Pope of Greenwich Village, but I think of his role in Star 80, where he's utterly one of the slimiest movie characters I've ever seen. But it's really hard to picture anyone but John Turturro playing that role.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. This is a film, of course, that introduces a couple actors that the Coens would work on with again many times, him and Steve Buscemi also. And both of them, and Steve Buscemi's barely in it. He's got that one scene where you see him, but the performance is amazing. He just delivers his dialogue a mile a minute. It's unbelievable how many words he packs into the 45 seconds.
I know, right?
It is that he's on screen.
And even when we hear him on the other end of the phone,
same thing.
He's still 100 miles an hour.
Well, first of all, I did want to say, you're absolutely right. I can't imagine Pesci playing, Casper, but I can't imagine anyone else. And that just tells you how powerfully, Turturro played that role. I just can't imagine anyone else in that role. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right about Roberts. It would be great in it too, but there's something just perfect about Turturro and the way he plays that role.
There's a real self-awareness, which is necessary. I mean, Bernie, unlike Tom, I think, and so here's a point of separation, really knows who he is, and he has embraced it. He's a fully realized human being, at least in that sense. But maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe it's one of Tom's virtues to some degree, that there's inner division and some question about who he is. So
I thought about that exact point, Troy, and I thought about again, going back to his plea at Miller's Crossing. And he says, we're not the kind of people that kill people. Well, he's wrong about that, right? He kills mink.
Yeah. Yeah. He also says, I never crossed a friend, which maybe up to that point he never did. If he doesn't count Casper as friend, Casper would, but he certainly goes on to not only, cross, but to kill a lover. Yeah, so he's not the kind of guy he's making himself out to be, for sure. Yeah,
maybe not. He is a very passionate person, and you can get into Tom's heart in these places where you're confronting death, it seems. But another place I saw his heart was when he's talking, I guess it was at his apartment after, when they were talking about Joe Stamps or whatever his Tops, whatever his name, the person who was going to be a front for him. And he says, that he's got another fix on a fight. Tom says, who is it? He says, oh, this is not the time to tell you, maybe later. But then you just see he makes this little face like he's really pleased with himself for keeping the secret. He has this devilish little smile on his face.
Yeah. Well, fellas, now before we exhaust our philosophical observations, anything else we want to, because usually at this point we go into the Coen brothers themes. Any other things you want to bring up?
I'll mention very briefly, probably not much to say about it, but one that sort of straddles the two. It's a common theme in Coen brothers, we've noticed, and it's a philosophical theme. Not huge here in a way, but it certainly comes up, the ideas of free will, destiny, and chance. I mean, chance obviously comes up in the sense that Tom is a gambler.
Yes.
It's very interesting how Tom, he's a gambler with very bad luck, at least when we see him. He's been on a losing streak and he continues on that losing streak. And that streak, in terms of gambling proper, doesn't change throughout the film. He keeps losing at cards, at horses, whatever it is. He always has the bad luck. He rides it out. He doesn't let Leo pay his debts, right? He rides it out, knowing eventually his luck is going to change. And in the end it does, but not because he wins a horse race or something, but because, he gets money out of Casper's pocket after Casper's killed. So he does get the money, right, in the end. But until then, he takes a lot of abuse as a result of his habit and just keeps on going back for more. Again, doesn't fight back, doesn't try to escape or anything like that. The place where luck and chance really matters for Tom, of course, is the second time he goes out, or is taken out to Miller's Crossing, where they're looking for the body to make sure he actually killed Bernie.
Yes.
And he could easily be killed and thinks he's going to be. And then they happen to find, not only are they lucky to find the body, but it's not Bernie's body. It's not there. They happen to find another body, which, he didn't arrange to have there or anything like that.
No,
That's a
you're right.
huge stroke of luck. So Tom the gambler sort of, I feel like he uses up all of the luck he has for the film in that one moment. That's like all he's got, and there it is. But he lives, of course, because of that.
Well, he's also lucky in a way. He's lucky that Casper finally comes to, he speaking of skepticism too, he's a sower of doubt for Casper. Casper was certain about his relationship with the Dane.
Yeah.
He just kept on planting seeds of doubt, he might have been killed there by the Dane, but then
easily, yes. It happened just in time that Casper decides that plot didn't have to work. He starts manipulating Casper from the very beginning, but he doesn't know that it's going to work. So yeah, he is lucky at various points as he goes along, for sure. It occurred to me on the way in here that the Dane is probably the only major character in the film who is actually loyal and who never betrays anybody. Everyone else at some point is disloyal or shifts loyalties like Casper does from the Dane
double
to
cross.
Tom. Everyone else gets the kiss off or the double cross, but the Dane, whatever you can say about his brutality and his cruelty and so on, you got to admire his loyalty. It's there to the end.
And maybe he's as smart as Tom too, because he figures it all out what's happening with Tom.
He's clearly very smart.
He does seem as smart as Tom. He's the one who's our main antagonist with regard to Tom. But I noticed there's very little that the Dane says that I don't go, yeah, he's right about that.
Right, that's right. He reveals Tom's inner passion too when he's marching him out to kill him there. Remember, Tom starts throwing up.
Yeah.
And he says to his friend, like, have you ever noticed that, that he's shutting his mouth now? He's soiling his pants. His little mouth is finally shut. He's like, now we're seeing behind that, that screen of repartee and witty, remarks that you spend. Now we're seeing, deeper into you. I mean, it's true. Like you said,
he's
true.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's right.
When I first watched the film, when Tom vomits, it struck me. I was like, wait, Tom is vomiting? You figure Tom would just be the guy who would just take the bullet,
Exactly.
Well, this relates to one of the Coen brothers themes, actually, I want to talk about. It's a larger theme about interiors and exteriors. So I was going to say about Tom has soft stuff inside, and in this film in that moment to be crude, you literally get to see it, right? All this time we've been waiting, what's inside Tom? We want to see what's inside Tom, right? And here it is. But you're right, Peter, he is revealed in that moment. So there's this theme that's been coming out, and I mention it partly because I think it's going to become very prominent in a couple films that are coming up. Narrowly construed, this won't include the vomit, but it's about home invasions, which in each film so far of the three that we've watched, there's been a home invasion at some point. In Blood Simple, Visser breaks into their home and he takes the gun and so on. In Raising Arizona, of course, they break into the Arizona's house to steal the baby. And in this film, obviously the Casper's men break. Oh, Bernie too. That's right. Actually, that's an even better run way. I was thinking of Casper's men breaking into Leo's house, but you're right. Bernie, of course, another more evidence for the doppelganger thing. Bernie comes and goes at Tom's place as he pleases.
He pleases.
And other than Miller's Crossing, that's basically the only place we see Bernie is at Tom's place. So I mean, there's a real close connection between these two. But yeah, the home invasion thing, I mentioned it because we're going to see it again in Fargo very prominently. We're going to see it in The Big Lebowski, where people come and go into his place as they please. And the larger theme I feel like this is a part of is about unreliable borders. Or permeable borders, something like that. The inside coming out. Robert, you mentioned in Blood Simple about the pipes under the sink, the stuff that's supposed to be concealed that we're not supposed to see, that is so revealing somehow when it is. And there's metaphors and analogies between this and punctured bodies and the things that happen to the bodies in their films, the stuff we're not supposed to see when it comes out. The vomiting is another case, of a lesser case, but still bodies are very important, of course, in Coen films. Like when a person dies in a Coen film, they don't just disappear. The body's still there. It has to be dealt with, right? It's a problem of some sort, or it's evidence or something. It's a plot point that leads to things later on, But I noticed that watching the home invasion sequence again at Leo's place, And this made me think of Barton Fink with the drains and the stuff in the walls and stuff, that Leo first notices that something's going on because he's got the music turned up so loud he can't hear anything. But he notices because, of course, the smoke from downstairs is coming through the cracks in the floor. So again, we have these permeable borders that I think keep showing up in Coen films. And I mentioned this partly because I think Barton Fink is going to be so much about this. That's the next film, of course, in a way that Miller's Crossing is starting to work towards, with, again, the Gabriel Byrne, Tom's, interior and exterior and the border that he's trying to keep solid. That Barton Fink is a person who's, the interior exterior border is completely collapsing, so he doesn't know what's real and what's not. So we'll talk a lot more about that when we get there. But I was, this time around, thinking forward to that, really noticing how much of that there is in a way with Tom's character as well. Not that he doesn't know what's real and what's not, except as far as he goes, right? Himself, he doesn't know who he is and what's real in that. So he doesn't know why he's doing what he's doing. So, and then I felt like the vomiting scene was sort of the external symbolic manifestation of some of that. But, and also I think, Peter, as you're kind of suggesting, it's him coming out of it. It's him standing revealed and actually learning to be a real human being. He's vulnerable in that moment. He is real. There is no more pretense. And the Dane even comments on that. Yeah.
And of course, the Dane throws his hat. So
yeah, he really throws it.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Great gesture of dismissal. That's amazing.
One of the Coen themes I saw in this film, as we've seen in the past three films, is their use of language, which is, in this film, of the three, this sort of reaches the pinnacle of their kind of specialized language. It's almost, you need a glossary. I mean, having to look up these words. What does he mean by hi-hat? But the other theme is, not only is the vocabulary insulary, you're kept out. You have to really work to figure out what they're saying. But also, as we saw in Raising Arizona, he puts these sort of oddly sophisticated, this verbiage into the mouths of what appear to be like Philistines, right? So, I mean, the kinds of things that Casper's saying when he says something, when last we jawed, it's like, who says that kind of stuff? Especially
when last we jawed.
But the Coens love that. They loved it. I can imagine them sitting there writing the screenplay and just really basking in the beauty of every word. Like, let's use this word here. So
totally.
Until Big Lebowski, this is probably the most quotable Coen film, and it remains one of the most quotable. There's so many lines from this film you can quote.
Yeah, I sometimes think that's one of the things that draws, nerdy types like us to their films, is because they clearly, we share with them, a kind of joy of words and the way they're put together and what we can do with them. Again, for me, it's always like what they reveal, what they conceal, how we use them to tell the truth, how to deceive, and just the beauty of it, the mastery that they can exhibit, with it. I also think with them, it's the scenery and the little details. It's almost Talmudic, the little things you can see. You can just I'm freeze framing it all the time and looking at. Like here was a lot of those old, like the rice puffs and the little the whiskey bottles and this little period consumer goods that were all over the place, as well as, of course, the clothing. Like one other place I think gay men appear is when Lazar, the Tom's bookies, people show up to beat him up in the hallway outside of his place. They're so beautiful. They're such beautiful men. They're such dandies. They have just elegant faces, beautiful kerchiefs in their suit. These are
and their overcoats are coordinated. They all have the same black, beautiful, tailored. It's the form-fitting suit. Which actually, when I saw those overcoats in that scene in particular, when they beat up Tom, which I should mention, I counted, Tom gets beat up 7 times in the film.
7 times.
Those things, they also they reminded me of the SS, the kind of fitting long jackets too. But yeah,
where there's a homoerotic quality into that too. But I mean, I just thought, man, these dandies are just lovely. They're so beautiful, and that takes attention to that kind of detail with the physical qualities of the film. The one thing I didn't like about the way they filmed it, I think they should have made it darker. The rooms were too bright, and one thing about noir is it's dark and it's at night and it's in these grimy cities that you didn't see enough of the outside city at night. I think there are a few bits, but
yeah, there's really very little. That might have partly been a budget thing, but you're right. And it's funny because I had remembered it being darker, and I was surprised watching it how brightly lit most of the film is. Yeah, it's odd. It's
like that club where they the club.
Yeah,
is so sweet. My God,
it's like Disneyland. Like these kind of men aren't going to go and drink at a place like that.
Yeah, they usually have those lights on the tables with the little lampshades. You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about? That was a period piece for them. But I don't know why they went that way. That was maybe a cinematographer or something. But yeah, I would have liked to see more of the grimy city.
Any other themes of Coen Brothers, Peter? Like we once, the past two times we've talked about things like nihilism. Any?
Yeah, I was about to say nihilism is a big theme for me, of course. So like, where's the nihilism here? I see it as, that you touched on in the beginning, Robert, there's all this corruption everywhere, but there's all these attempts to hide it, but it just keeps on, coming up, coming up, coming up, despite people talking to the contrary, which maybe is even characteristic of nihilism, that people like to say, oh no, I'm not a nihilist, I'm a devout, Christian or something, or, but the nihilism, as Nietzsche points out, it can pervade those discourses too. And I think this the world that these people inhabit ends up being extremely nihilistic. Yeah. So
I know, circling back to that thing about language, the other trope or the kind of Coen Brothers theme, which we know and love well with the Coen Brothers, is in the Coen Brothers films, lines, there's the theme of like repetition. And especially of course if we think about the Big Lebowski, how the dude is echoing these things he hears. But even in this film we get glimpses of, Tom says, he says a couple times, nobody knows anybody not that well, right? There's this repetition of language that appears when you watch the film the first time. At least for me, I kind of missed it. It took a second time for me to go, oh wait, that's what he said earlier, and that's what she said. So in this film, we get a little bit of that Coen thing where you can imagine them again writing the screenplay and go, okay, let's have him say it in this context versus this context. So they're really masters of reusing and repeating dialogue in different contexts to make different points,
Yeah. And sometimes it succeeds in a purpose, sometimes it fails. And I noticed that too, Robert.
Yeah, Robert, you mentioned the line, it's a wrong situation, which is a great example, which Casper uses early on, right? Talking about Bernie, and then Bernie uses when he's about to be killed. You can't do this, Tom. Guys like us don't do this. It's a wrong situation. It's great.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but the issue of the hat, we could spend as much as you want, but what do you guys think about the hat? And I think, Troy, you mentioned earlier that the image of the hat was one of the first things I think Joel Coen said in an interview that he had in mind. He had this image of a hat. And I've read interviews where Joel says, look, it was just a hat and that's all it was. And everyone wants to give it meaning. And we don't know if that's subterfuge or what.
I mean, it's the Coen brothers, so we can probably rely on that it's subterfuge to some degree because they never tell the truth in interviews. And especially when they're saying things like, oh, this means nothing, or, oh, we don't put philosophical ideas in our film. Like, come on. But in this case, I think I want to not lean too heavily on the hat. I think it's not a single unified symbol or anything like that, but they certainly do interesting things with it. Peter, you just mentioned the case of the Dane throwing Tom's hat away into the woods just before he thinks he's about to kill him. The phrase "the high hat" obviously is used repeatedly early on. I mean, it's a plot point, but I think more too when Tom goes to see Verna because she's got his hat.
His hat.
Yeah. And of course, later on, he says to her the line after he describes the dream, right? There's nothing more foolish than a man chasing his hat. Well, that's what he was doing at the beginning when he went to see her.
He does it throughout the film. He chases his hat many times.
I know, right? He's like self-criticizing here.
Every time it gets knocked off his head, even
he's
when
always chasing his hat. That's right.
When Leo is beating the crap out of him, he still picks up his hat.
He gets it eventually. When it's always getting away from him, but he's getting it. So it certainly serves a kind of a significatory function of the sort of goal that's always just out of reach, or you're grabbing it but you can't hold on to it, right? Something like that. Beyond that, I'm not exactly sure. It looks great. Well, they are great looking hats.
It is on the head, and so it's close to the brain. And remember, Casper always tells him, make sure you put one in the brain.
Yeah, true.
And people who, if my memory is failing or not, but with Leo, some people don't wear hats as much, and they're less brain oriented, and they're more creatures of heart. But also, it tends to be, as I like to, push the line that these things can be deceptively, and with your allusion to Hume, they position themselves as rational, detached, heady, but they're connected to the heart, at least connected, or at least heart. Because look at that scene with him coming to the Verna's place. The first, he says, "I'm here for my hat," and with that, she closes the door. But then at the second opening of the door, we find like he wants more than just the hat. But he does leave with the hat. She says, "I won. I'm not giving it to you. I won it. It's mine." She states a rule like Walter would, but he does leave with the hat, and he's very good with that. Remember, he flips it onto his foot when he first gets home. It's like this. Wondered how many takes it took to do that.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So I thought of it as a connection to the head and just a visual device to link through scenes, because they do take such delight in little visual devices, like that. So,
and I think the reason versus emotion sentiment thing, there's the scene where they're in Vernon's apartment, and that when he makes his way in there, and he says, "Let's get Stinko," and she says, "Let's do some other things first." And then she grabs his hat and she throws the hat on the chair, which is now it's time to stop thinking. It's time to come from from the heart. And they show his hat land on the chair that she throws. So I think there is that theme of when you lose your hat, you're not thinking clearly. I was also thinking that I noticed in the last time I watched it that John Turturro, that Bernie character, I might be wrong. He's the only one who changes hats. He has a bowler hat.
Oh.
And then we see him later when he shows up. He has like a kind of like peasant, look like a street urchin kind of cap on. So I don't think anyone else has a different hat. And of course, Bernie's hat is the giveaway at the boxers. You remember Tom Feist?
Yeah.
Bernie left his hat. He puts it on the boxer's head. So it's interesting that Bernie wears different hats. And of course, he's Jewish. And of course, he's homosexual.
The fact that there was a dream about it, shows that connection with the non-rational too, because it's like Descartes having these dreams, to start. It's like, what, a dream? What's more non-rational than a dream? But that's where his hat was. That's
The other thing I was thinking is, what do you think is the quintessential sartorial artifact of a gangster? It's got to be a fedora, right? I mean, so it's kind of a meta to me in some ways of the gangster film.
Yeah.
That and Troy, you and I were talking about I actually ended up watching the French film Les Doulos, which have. People have been saying at the end of that film. Well, it's 1963. Can we do a spoiler for the film? Anyway, at the end of the film, the gangster, the scene is he gets shot and then he falls and his hat flies off and it's lying there upside down. And there is an echo of that kind of scene in that film. So I don't know if that's something the Coen brothers were thinking of, but.
Well, that makes me think of Rug Daniels and the kid taking his toupee and running off.
Yeah, that's another thing. He loses his head.
Oh, his hat. I never thought of that.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Yeah. Perfect.
Before we go to our cinematic and plot character observations, let's talk a little bit about the music. And in particular, let's talk about, if one of you two guys wants to talk about one of the most memorable, there's the John Turturro Miller's Crossing scene, but of course there's the Leo, the Leo assassin scene and the use of Danny Boy. And what do you, talk to me, one of you guys, talk to me about the music and the soundtrack. And of course, Carter Burwell is really good at taking these kind of folk ballads as he does in Fargo and turns it into these grand themes. But
I really didn't like the opening song, the opening theme. I thought it was too grandiloquent and more like melancholy, like Danny Boy, the version of it that's played there. It seemed, I don't know, it was almost like, like a couple on its 50th anniversary might feel looking back across their life together. It had this warm.
It was a little schmaltzy for you.
A little schmaltzy. I don't know. I think there should have been something a little bit darker with more dissonance in it, or something a little bit more brooding. I don't know.
I can see that.
I'm going to defend it, and here's how. This is interesting. This is interesting. I could see they're going darker because it's a very dark film, but and maybe this gets back to the question of the cinematography too, and the brightly lit stuff. That I think they want us to discover how dark the film is without signaling it on the surface in those kind of ways, and especially if we think about the kinds of characters here. I'm thinking about the Irish ones in particular, and so I'm going to engage in a couple of sort of ethnic stereotypes to some degree. But these particular Irish characters, Leo. I'm thinking about Leo. Leo's a very sentimental guy.
He
He's
really is.
powerful, he's manly, but he's all heart. And again, that's his issue. And that's why he and Tom in the end can't even stay together, right? It's not going to work. You can't outsource your thinking, right? You got to think some yourself. So Leo is this very powerful guy. He's been very successful, but he is, after all, the kind of guy who will put on his house coat and lie back with a drink and listen to Danny Boy and probably cry a little, because it's a beautiful sort of schmaltzy, sentimental song. So, the traditional Irish song that Carter Burwell based this on was suggested by Gabriel Byrne. And so I'm thinking there's something sort of authentic about the idea that these rough, violent, macho men also are the type that would tear up a little when they see a puppy or something like that. Like they have that
Yeah.
schmaltzy sentimental side and they
Mhm.
sort of mythologize their own gangster doings and they want to sort of sing songs about their bravery, right? And stuff like that. And so in a way, we're hearing almost their commentary on the action through this introductory music, something along those lines. Because I was thinking when I rewatched that sequence with Leo about how it is that the song expresses him so well, and the fact that it keeps playing through the entire sequence, even to the end. It's like he's orchestrating it, which is what he
Well,
does,
it
right? Like,
does. I was just think it does fit in a kind of like sometimes there's almost like a David Lynchy quality, like the scene where the boxer just starts screaming bloody murder, and he has this weird posture, like he's like just sitting
yeah,
there in his living room, like he doesn't articulate any words. I thought it was very, even the way the camera angles were, very David Lynchian. And think about Blue Velvet, how it opens up with the Angela Dallami's whatever it is. Theme. I think Lynch will use things in that way too, where you're kind of juxtapose that kind
hmm
of schmaltziness. Plus, that schmaltziness can be a signifier of like actually a kind of emotional, immaturity. I think
hmm
about like those action thrillers, the professional, with the
yeah,
French
yeah,
guy. Yeah. He has a little. Not only is his, he loves the. I mean, it's really creepy, but he loves a child. But he has a little flower in a pot, that he cares for, and you're just thinking like, this guy is a kind of weird, but also stunted emotional life here. This is not the emotional life of an adult, unless it's a perverse adult.
Oh, I think, that theme, Troy, that you referred to, the Irish folk theme, it's called Lament for Limerick. Peter, I think here's where I agree with you in that if you screened me Miller's Crossing without the Carter Burwell theme,
Mhm.
and then on another occasion you played me his arrangement, his orchestration of that theme, I would probably say, no, I don't think this is from that movie. So there
Yeah.
is a little bit of an incongruity where I'm like, and as you mentioned, it does have a Lynchian quality where you're like, is this supposed to make me feel a way that I'm not really feeling? Because some parts in the film, when they start the theme, maybe jarring is too strong a word, but it's unexpected. I'm like, I would expect a darker theme
Mm.
right now. And they're playing this sort of, it's not exactly a happy theme, but as you mentioned, it's kind of like a couple looking back on their 50th wedding anniversary. So I see your point there, but I mean, it's a beautiful arrangement and it does capture that sort of
Yeah. It's got
the
that Irish quality.
it's
I
got
mean,
the
yeah.
Blue
Irish quality.
Velvet too is about, by the way, a dark underside of the world.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's true. Let me say one thing about Danny Boy, which is the Coen brothers, they requested that the arrangement of Danny Boy was arranged in such a way so it coincided with all the moves that are happening. And that scene, it is a brilliant scene when when the assassins come up the stairs. But
Yeah.
that version of Danny Boy, it's a version that was particularly arranged by the Coen brothers to, coincide with the points of action in that scene. But I think
Oh,
what's interesting is, of course, Danny Boy is kind of like the poster
yeah.
song for this Irish longing. But it's interesting because the lyrics, if you look at Danny Boy, it's a song about longing and a kind of abandonment and saying like, when am I going to see you again? And of course, this is the moment when Leo's power is called into question and Tom is sort of the prodigal son going away. So I think Danny Boy has other significance that it's sort of echoing this theme between Tom and Leo. And I think there's a lot of levels on which Danny Boy really works. It's not, here's the thing. You could use Danny Boy in a film like this and it can be totally bad. It could be like
Yeah.
tropey, but it's not, right?
Yeah.
You go along with it. And I think that's part of the reason.
they really turn up the stylized elements in that scene. I mean, like the way that guy gets shot with a machine gun, like he just it's like it's a dance, like he's doing a kind of dance, like the
Well,
Tommy gun.
they call that the Thompson jitterbug. That's what
The
they call
Thompson
it.
jitterbug. He says the Thompson jitterbug.
That's what it's known as. Yeah.
For real?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. They
didn't just
love
coin
that.
that.
No, they use the term. Yeah. They loved that sequence. They were so into that. They're so tickled with themselves. When you read the interviews and stuff where they talk about it, they're so tickled with themselves for even sort of thinking about it and thinking of him, like shooting off his own toes and stuff as he's doing it. Like, oh man. And it is very striking. Obviously, it really stays with you. You're right. The whole sequence, yeah, so stylized.
It's so stylized, and the way that the machine guns never run out of bullets too. Like Leo just keeps firing that damn thing, and you're like, big is that fucking magazine?
I read someone online who I trust knows about guns saying they counted the shots and they said Leo would have to reload like 5 times. Or something.
5 times, right? I mean, it just never.
Well, I want to go back to my Coen Brothers gun rule then for that, because again, the way a person uses a gun and what he does with them tells us about his character. And so we talked about Tom almost never firing the only shot with which he intends to fire to kill, he does kill, etc. Leo is sort of the opposite in some ways, right? What do we see with him? Excess, right? All these bullets, like indiscriminate. If Tom uses one bullet to kill the one person he kills, Leo just fires and fires and never ends, never even thinks about, why would I stop? And is completely calm, of course, as
As you say, fearless. He is totally a lion.
Yeah.
Plus, he's got those little slippers, by the way, with the little crowns on. I thought that was a brilliant touch. But
the slippers are amazing, and the cigar. When he's done, he puts the cigar back in his mouth. Like the whole thing, it's played up for comic effect.
It's
absolutely
so played up, yeah.
But it's also very fun and suspenseful. I mean, it's exciting to watch as well. So
yeah, in the wake of that, there was another moment of Leo's love for Tom. Remember, he sends his big rough guy to tell Tom that. He punches him. He says, but there's a message from Leo, stay away from the place because we're going to attack it. Didn't have to do that. He could have killed him.
That's true.
But he made sure that Tom was going to be safe, even after all they'd been through.
That's true.
Hey, going back to that Thompson jitterbug in we talked earlier, we talked about the connections in the first films to Bonnie and Clyde, the film by the Warren Beatty and
Faye
Dunaway. But I'm pretty sure, if I remember, when in the scene when they finally meet their end, Bonnie and Clyde, they do the Thompson jitterbug as well. They're bouncing all around.
I think you're right. Yeah, there's a lot of bullets in that scene. You could very well be right.
Yeah. Going to some cinematic features, the character observations. One of the things I noticed. Well, one thing we should just throw out there is just a little point of fact that I didn't know until I read it. And going back to our theme of masculinity and homosexuality is, you'll probably miss it, but Albert Finney is seen in drag in the women's room when Tom bursts in to confront Verna.
Really?
Yes.
Right near the door, on the right, there's a woman in like a maid. I think it's like a maid outfit.
I did notice her. Yeah, it was him.
That's Albert Finney in drag.
Robert had to point this out to me, and then I saw it and I thought, oh my God. Yeah,
what was the purpose? They're just having fun, or what?
I think from what I read, he finished his shoot, but he didn't want to leave New Orleans. He was having so much fun. And so they said, he said, can I be in another scene? So they said, well, we'll put you in the scene. And apparently he was happy to put on if you watch him, he shrieks and he does the sign of the cross and runs out. So he really,
it's hilarious. You got to check it out.
I remember.
I want to suggest a second purpose for this, even knowing that, he suggested it himself, but I think it relates back to that theme I was talking about earlier of permeable borders and stuff. Like to begin with, you have a man going into the women's room. So you already have penetration, another kind of home invasion in a sense. And then added to it, the fact that you've got this other guy who happens to be the actor who's playing one of the main and most macho characters in the film, all done up in drag in this. It's like penetrating borders all over the place. So I think it fits right in.
I love how he says to them, close your eyes, ladies.
Close your eyes, ladies. Oh, man.
I saw an interview with Gabriel Byrne, and he said that after the scenes that Albert Finney was doing, he just hung around. He was enjoying New Orleans. And Byrne says that they were there for St. Patrick's Day. So he said, Byrne notices, hey, there's a St. Patrick's Day parade. And he goes to the parade. And who is the kind of master of whatever the main guy of the parade is. Albert Finney's up on the float waving.
What?
So he insinuated his way into being the master of ceremonies of the New Orleans St. Patrick's Day parade.
No way.
That's amazing.
So he had
That's
a
a
lot of
great
fun
story.
with it. He had a lot
And
of
Peter,
fun.
you
so
probably
great.
know he was a last minute replacement, right? They had
Yes.
to bring him in. Yeah. The actor that was going to play that role suddenly died of a
Who was
brain
Nathan
hemorrhage.
Arizona.
Right, the guy that played Nathan Arizona. And Albert Finney happened to be available and they somehow got him. And he's just unbelievable, of course, in this role.
You know, another thing I noticed, so we have the opening what we talked about with Casper in the office with the two bosses and their consiglieres, and then you cut to the title sequence. And the title sequence is, of course, Miller's Crossing and the theme. Now, what I didn't realize until I watched it a few times is, at least I think, that's Tom's dream. And here's why, because
Yeah,
the
yeah,
scene-
yeah. It makes sense.
he wakes his buddy Tad is the guy's name. He says, you know, that's when he says, "Are you awake? Your eyes are closed." And so he's sleeping. And then later in the film, right, he says, "I had this dream where my hat blew off my head." We're seeing Tom's dream that he describes to Verna later on. So I thought that was interesting, an insight
That's
that
cool. Yeah.
I didn't see. Another thing I was thinking about is, and Troy and I, Troy, we went to see The Holdovers, which we loved. We've seen it a couple times.
I love that too. Yeah.
Oh, you loved it
Great.
too, yeah. And
I loved it, yeah.
we've talked about the issue of, or the technique of the dissolve and how Alexander Payne loves to use the dissolve, and it's sort of gone out of fashion. There's some really, not many, but there are some really nice dissolves in this film. And one of them was when Tom, when he's in Verna's apartment and she throws the hat and they're going to make love, and the camera pans to the window and the curtains are blowing, and it dissolves to the curtains blowing, and we pan in and we see we're in Leo's. This is when he's going to the attempted assassination.
Yeah.
It's such a lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is.
I remember seeing that same device used in some old films. I can't remember what they were, but yeah, the move away from the couple to the blowing curtains in the window.
Oh, yeah. Or to the fireplace. Yeah. Something
The
like that. That's
fireplace,
right.
yeah.
They do the curtains thing twice, I think, in this film, right? There's
Yeah,
two
when
different-
Verna goes out the window.
Yes,
and-
that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's the fireplace behind Casper when he's just about to, hit the Dane over the head with a shovel.
There's a very Vulcan kind of, he's sitting there, he's got this look on his face. He's got his hand on the, I guess whatever that instrument is, but there is a overtone of he's coming from Hades to kill, to kill the
Yeah.
Dane.
Yeah, that's right.
This just hit me yesterday. Is the name of the film is Miller's Crossing, which, the double entendre, the theme of double crossing is a big theme in
Yes,
this film. I
absolutely,
think there
yeah.
might be a little bit of a.
My stepson pointed that to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a question that Troy and I have talked about, and I want to just put this out there. We can come up with some ideas. Why does Tom kill Bernie? Troy, what do you think about that? I mean, we've talked about it, but
We have talked about it, so it probably won't surprise you anything, I think. But I mean, first of all, again, I think the film is very deliberately written so that there is no one right answer. We cannot be sure. And I think that Tom himself isn't really sure. Some of the most plausible answer, first of all, Peter, I agree with what you said a while ago. He didn't have to. It's gratuitous. It's not a strategic move. It didn't have to be done, which is why Bernie is so surprised that he's going to do it, right? So then what are the possibilities if it's not something like that? I think in one way or another, most of the answers come down to something like Tom turns out to have a heart after all. It's not about reasons or what he has reason to do. It's about passion. He wants Bernie dead. Now, why is that? Well, again, because Bernie is his doppelganger, because he resembles him too much. And so he has to excise that part of him and reject it in the strongest possible terms. Or because Bernie has taken advantage of him. He's exploited him, and he threatens to start eating in restaurants, right? One of the greatest threats ever. But he was blackmailing him. He deserves to die for that. And then past that, he mocked Tom for being manipulated earlier. He says, "Oh, I'll just start to cry again and you'll let me go," just like before. Tom's ego is bruised by this, right? He realizes, so he hates Bernie because of this. Or he thinks that he should have killed him to begin with, that it was a mistake, that that's where many of his problems began, and he can set it right now, at least in a symbolic way, if not, in a real way. Something like that. I mean, it has to be something along those lines. It's not strategic. There's no real rational reason in that sense for him to do it.
Bernie says, what's the angle?
What's the angle, right? What's in? Yeah, that's why he's so I think it literally doesn't appear. It doesn't occur to Bernie that Tom might do this because there is no angle, and so Tom surprises him. It's a great irony in a way, isn't it? Right? It's wonderful. Like, it comes together that the first time in Miller's Crossing, he appeals to Tom's heart and gets away that way, and then at the end, Tom turns out to have a heart, which Bernie had thought he didn't. And that's, and he turns out dead, but it's a violent heart. It's a passionate, violent, passionate heart, and he's going to kill him. And of course, he tries the same thing again, look into your heart. And Tom says, what heart? Which is a very hard line to interpret, but because I think it's clear that Tom, again, does have a heart in some sense. He's acting on passion here. But at the very least, again, many things we could say, but one thing, maybe the most obvious is, if by heart you mean compassion, I've got none of that, or at least none for you, right? You're trying to appeal to the sense of compassion in me. That'll never happen again, right? Something like that. But, some people, I think, read it as saying that Tom literally has no heart at all. He's given up on that, right? I don't think that's right. I think at the end of it, Tom clearly has come to recognize that he's like Leo in certain ways. He does have a heart. He has passions. He's moved by that. It's not just about reason. So whatever's going on, it has to be conciliant, I think, with that. So that's what I have to say about it, I think, anyway.
No, I think you're right. I think that there's really no logical, as you point out, there's no pragmatic reason. And I kind of feel like the way that's what sits for me just when I think about the sort of closure on the narrative is Bernie deserved to die. And in the same way that his moral intuition, not the rational argument, the moral intuition is what drove him to point the gun away from Bernie. That same moral intuition is, this fucker deserves to die after everything he's done. And I mean, of course, there's no fact of the matter, but when I think about the narrative, I'm like, I get closure and I think everything seems right.
I agree that I think you're right. He's acting, at least in large part, out of a sense of poetic justice, and it's not a matter of reason as much as a matter of passion. There is a complicating thing here that we should mention, which is that not long before this, he ran into Verna in the street and they talked about Bernie. And I think he says to her at that point that Bernie's still alive. And that's when he says, well, she says, do you expect me to believe that? And he says, no, but in fact, it's true. But then he goes off and kills Bernie right after that. And so we have to ask, well, why would he do this knowing that, what this is going to do to her? I mean, doesn't he care about her at all? Because it sure seems like he does care about her. And might he not even have the desire to, that maybe they can work it out and get together? I mean, has he just totally given up on that? But even if he cares about her, this is not a thing to do. So, but he does it anyway. And so to me, I think there's so much we could say about this. To me, it feels like, yes, he does have a passion for Verna. He does care about her. In this moment, it's not the ruling passion. The one that's ruling him, the one that really is moving him, is the desire for justice, to kill Bernie, to exercise his doppelganger, and so on. And later on, he's going to think about it and kind of think, oh, crap, poor Verna. But in this moment, that it doesn't really, this is a movie about conflicting loyalties and conflicting passions. And so this is sort of just, one last example of that, essentially.
Yeah, that's what makes the movie so gripping, is those conflicts, those triangles, those being pulled in different directions, those ambiguities. Yeah, so I agree with everything you have to say. I was hoping I could throw in the Verna thing you got there before me, because that's exactly how it went. I guess maybe if I were to elaborate on it, I might say I'm more into the it's when he says that he says it has to be you, and then he gives that account, which we immediately see that's bullshit. But he seems like, no, it has to be you. So for what reason does it have to be you? I would just emphasize not just revenge, but Bernie has been a sort of force of disruption and trouble all along for him. I mean, my first thought is what you said. It's not the ruling passion. Maybe though in that moment he's decided to give up on it all, because it seems like at the cemetery he never does really. It's a classic thing, these love stories where the lover will make a declaration and present themselves. Like, he never tries, and she even begs him to, like, you want me to stop seeing Leo, right? You're jealous. Please.
He says all you have to do is ask.
All you have
Yeah.
to do is ask.
Yeah.
Come on. But he's now decided, and it seals that deal. He knows that if Bernie's dead, he can never really be with Verna. And if he kills Bernie, he can never be with Verna. And he wants to put a stake in that because it's been that's been tormenting too. The Verna thing's been tormenting him. The Bernie thing's been tormenting him, and he's done with it. He's stepping away from it, which he finally does out at the gravesite. But
Yes.
why does he even go to the funeral anyway? You're thinking like, this is the guy he killed, and like, yeah. But anyway,
It's a little uncomfortable. It's true when the guy that killed the guy who you're burying shows up at the funeral.
like,
yeah, not done, but.
And she
Peter, don't ever
understands.
do
She
that.
says "drop dead" to him, right? She says "drop dead," right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and we know she means it now, and that she drives off. Maybe from both of them. In fact, she's done with them too. I got the sense that he'd reached his limit with all this, and he wanted out, and that was going to definitely do it for him. But I agree with the doppelganger thing, by the way, too. Like, there is this parity between them. You see it in the chairs; they're sitting right across from each other. They're inhabiting the same space. They're angle workers in so many ways, but he can't tolerate that either. He can't stand that. There's something in his being just cannot accept the implications of that.
Bernie almost feels like sometimes Tom's dark shadow. Like very few other people in the film even see Bernie. They talk about him, but only a couple of other gangsters, when they take him out in the woods and stuff, actually see him. So Tom's the one that basically sees and interacts with Bernie. We know he's real because he killed Casper and so on, unless we're going to sort of do a Fight Club type interpretation or something. But I'm pretty sure he is real. But they present him. It's a little like Anton Chigurh later on in No Country for Old Men. Very few people actually see him. He is this figure of mystery in that way. I want to say about Verna quickly, there is a moment. Here's an interpretation. There's another interpretation that I'm drawn to, but I don't know that it's right, but it's got enough plausibility to mention it. There is a moment partway through the film, like basically right after Leo gives him the kiss off and then gives Verna the kiss off, where he could be with Verna if he wanted to. At that point, if he doesn't go to Casper and do all that stuff and get involved with Casper,
Absolutely,
they could be together. So I do wonder on some level, look, maybe what's really going on is he's clearly attracted to Verna. There's something there, but she's not the one he really loves. The one he really loves is Leo. And so that's what's really driving him all the way through. And again, he's conflicted about that. He worries that it makes him like homosexual, like Bernie or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's the person, whether it's sexual or not, whether it's romantic or not, right? That's the one he really loves. I think at the very least, we have to say he loves Leo more than Verna, given the choices that he makes at the end of the day. Leo's the one that he protects. It's not her.
Why doesn't he accept Leo's, apology? It's almost, talk about beyond the norm. I mean, that's an extraordinary act of forgiveness, really, for somebody like him, I think. But he doesn't accept it. He's like, I didn't ask for it. I don't want it.
I know. Well, forgiveness is sort of a non-rational thing, It's, although now he's got a heart, so you might think, well, he should. I don't know. I tend to think either he thinks that Leo doesn't deserve it or that he doesn't deserve it. He did betray Leo. So maybe he shouldn't be forgiven for the stuff that he's done, especially with Verna and so on. Or maybe he thinks, look, Leo's a sap. He's a man of the heart and so on, right? I can't forgive him for his shortcomings. It's very
You may
hard
be
to
right
know.
about him not deserving, because there was that interesting exchange. Remember, Verna says, we're real bad people.
Right.
He seems to resist it, but she presses on. No, we're real heels.
Yeah.
And he may have internalized that still.
In which case, Leo's offering him forgiveness would actually even lower Leo further in his eyes, right? He'd be like, how can you forgive somebody like me who has treated you the way I have, right?
I didn't see it as much like that, Troy. I see him, Tom is his own man. There's 3 opportunities that he has in the film to have his debts paid off. Leo offers to pay off his debts. Casper offers to pay off his debts. Bernie offers to pay off his debts. He is his own man. And I've thought about this thing with the issue of apology and forgiveness, right? And it's a relational property in the sense that Tom didn't ask for his forgiveness, right? So the agency is with Leo, and Leo is saying, I forgive you. And I think that goes with this theme of Tom being his own man. It's like, that's encroaching on Tom's autonomy. Look, I didn't ask for your forgiveness. That's not me. I'm not doing that. The other thing is that there's a sense in which he and Verna's attraction, he didn't feel like he had to apologize for that. And see, Leo trivializes the relationship, right? But he says, look, you kids, you're young, right? And he writes it off to some kind of youthful indiscretion. And I feel like Tom's like, fuck you, man. No, I love Verna. So no, goodbye, Leo, right? He ends it right there. So I think that's, to me, I didn't see him as saying, look how weak or Leo's all heart. I saw Tom as, again, being in line with being his own man and not wanting any kind of, he doesn't want charity from anyone, even if it's forgiveness.
I agree with you. I just want to put a little darker spin on it. Remember, the bartender said, like, I admire a man of principle when he tells my, but then like Tom looks back like, what? And there's like a sense of, that was an ironic remark to make, because he doesn't think he's a man of principle. Maybe Tom doesn't either.
Right.
Part of his tragedy maybe is that he's unable to accept love or to admit love. He's, for some unknown reason, he cannot accept or declare love to Verna. He can't do that either with Leo. Even though we know he loves both of them love him. He can't.
Well, I mean, he does declare his love for Verna, but in this kind of grotesque way, right?
Not real,
but the point is, he does say to her, "I love you, darling," or whatever he says to her, even though it's in that moment. So, and
wrapped in abuse.
But one way to read that is that's the only way. Tom's not going to sing the Song of Solomon, right?
I agree.
That's the only way it's going to come out. But
I agree. Yeah.
This circles back to the other question I had, which is, and of course, I love how ambiguous it is, which is, why does Tom tell Leo about his affair with Verna, right? And of course, one way to read it is, he wants to free himself from Tom so that he could be with Verna. That's a kind of a straight ahead reading of it, but it's way more complicated than that. And I don't even know if...
Or he wants to protect Leo from Verna.
He wants to protect Leo, but we're seeing that he's in love with Verna. He's in romantic love, at least, in this way with Verna. And also, remember when, I think they're in the boxing gym or something, and he says to her, look, head out of town to the Palisades. I'll meet you. You're right. He could have at that point said, I'll meet you tomorrow. We'll start a new life, right?
But
he doesn't.
No.
She's like, yeah, we could go. We could even take Bernie with us,
I don't think he liked that idea, bringing Bernie. So
no, not that part, no. But they could go. They could go.
They could have been together, absolutely. Robert, the thing I love about that question, why does he reveal this to Leo and therefore precipitating their falling out, is that we get two conflicting accounts later on, I think, from Tom himself, right? Because Tom says to Verna at one point, it was the only way I could see to protect Leo. But then later on at the funeral, I think it is, when Leo interprets it that way and says, oh, this was all a play to protect me. Tom doesn't want to say that. He says, no. He says, do you always know why you do what you do? Right. So he doesn't endorse that and say, yeah, Leo, that's what
he actually says, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe on a level he does, but he can't admit it to himself.
So maybe with Verna, he believed that was true and was sincere, or maybe he was just saying it to her, but he doesn't even know if that's true. We don't know what's going on with Tom. It's so hard to interpret him.
I want to end with an appropriate place, the end. We love Coen Brothers film endings. I have to say, I loved the ending of this film. So they're at this, and Peter, you mentioned that when I watched it, I was like, what kind of, is that a cemetery, or are they out near Miller's Cross? Are they burying him?
The hell?
Like, it's a weird place, but
maybe it's the Jewish graveyard. I don't know. Although that's
so small though. It must have been more, maybe. I don't know.
But they're at the funeral. She tells Tom to drop dead. She gets in the car and drives away, which many people have pointed out, which again, I watched a part of this, the third man, the end of the third man, if you remember, Joseph Cotton, he gets dropped off. He's on the road. I can't remember the actress. And he's in this long row at the cemetery. And the woman, she just like leaves him in the dust, so there is some third man stuff going on there. But the end of the film, it's really the wrap up of the film with Leo and Tom, which is, the central relationship of the movie. And then we get that final pan where Tom puts the hat on. He puts the hat over his eyes, like he assumes the classic gangster where you can't really see the noir, what's going on. But the camera then pans to his face, and it's a really touching scene.
Oh yeah. It's
the way that Tom's, his beautiful blue eyes of Gabriel Byrne, and it's such a pensive, it's like a longing. And again, as I said earlier, I think you see that Tom he's integrated the moral, the passion, and the reason. It's like he's a whole person. But I loved the ending of this film. I loved it so much. What do you think?
It's a great moment,
I don't know if I agree necessarily that he has integrated them yet. I think
Okay.
maybe he's open and vulnerable. He realizes now he needs to do something like that. But what we see is a hurt man, and we see the pain in his eyes, and it's so moving. I so agree with you. Two quick things on it. First, the movie I thought of was another Coen Brothers film, Inside Llewyn Davis. I thought of the end of that, where Llewyn Davis is very hurt, both physically, he's been beat up, but also emotionally. He's coming to finally acknowledge the grief he's been feeling for the whole film. And his last words are basically Tom's last words. Tom says, "Goodbye, Leo," and Llewyn Davis says, "Au revoir." Those are the last words in the film. And in both of them, someone drives off in a car. So there's a lot of little common elements there. I feel like they came back to that in Llewyn Davis. The other thing I want to say about the ending, I think about the beginning and the ending and how they differ, right? The film and Tom begin in this very opulent, luxurious, cozy room. He's got a drink. Everything is going well for him, right? He's in a position of power. It ends with him in the woods alone. I mean, just the visuals and the feel of that transition. I used to teach film from time to time, or films. I would tell my students, look at the first scene and look at the last scene. Look at the first image and the last image. Think of that. That's the direction of the film, right? And so we see, this is Tom starting in a very privileged, secure, stable place and being out in the open at the end, very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think I saw maybe also just the pain of a tragic, character, in the sense that he could have had both of them.
Definitely.
He ended up with neither.
Definitely.
Through his own tragic
pain.
flaws.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting too is, as you said that, Troy, the end of the film feels in a way like the beginning for Tom. It's like it's the end of the film, but the closure is one where, there's a whole new chapter of life for Tom. We don't know what it's going to be like, but I was thinking about how when you graduate from college, they call it a commencement. It's the last ceremony of your college, but it's the beginning. And I kind of felt like that. It's the last scene, but it harkens to a new life for Tom.
I see that. Yeah. I mean, who you could say it's like in that moment is Dante. Midway through my life, I found myself in a dark wood.
Nice.
There he is.
That's great.
Oh, maybe this can be a superhero. They can do like a superhero spinoff, like Tom Reagan superhero. He turns into like some Spider-Man type of guy, and they have a whole series. And anyway, thanks for tuning into another episode of No Podcast for Old Men. Coming up in February, we have, what are we doing? Barton Fink, right?
Barton Fink.
All right, so look for that. And until then,
that Barton Fink feeling.
If you made it this far, if you're actually listening, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts, however tiny they may be. We thank you for tuning in and listening to the rest of it.
Next, we're going to the Life of the Mind.
Life of the Mind. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thanks, you two guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It's great.